There is a challenge that is coming from digital currencies such as blockchain technologies.
So I think it's important to share that anything can be tokenized.
All the money.
I like the idea of a gold standard. I mean, it could be used in a very cryptocurrency way.
Very much sooner than a lot of people understand or think. We will be all at a level playing field.
Hey, welcome to the show. Molly Elmore here. I'm very excited to introduce my guest today, William DuVall, an actual rock star. That's not a metaphor for just being a cool guy. He's the lead singer of the band Alice in Chains. He's actively involved in our blockchain world and is a leader in the business side of the music industry. So before we get into the weeds, William, welcome. How are you doing today?
Oh, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So you just finished a tour. I had Guns N' Roses with you on part of that tour. So how was it? Tell us a bit about your recent tour that just recently ended.
Oh, it was really good. Yeah, Guns N' Roses, and did some stadiums, and then we also did some headlines on our own to make it all one cohesive run that's worth everyone's walk. You know, because it's tough for us to wrangle everybody, get a crew and everything. So the gun shows alone were great, but they wouldn't have been enough to justify us doing everything we have to do to mobilize to go out. So our own dates plus the Guns dates turned into a really nice run. And it was great to see those guys again. Always great to play with them, and always great to play for our own fans in our own house.
So 2023 also had an interesting year for you with a hit song with The Who called Warrior Souls. That spent some time on the rock chart. So tell us about that story and how that came to be.
Oh, that was really, really great. They just reached out to the office out of the blue. I was not expecting it. It was a pleasant surprise. And then it led to this amazing track. It took some twists and turns to get there. Originally, I was just I just thought I'll do a guest vocal. I'll just, like almost like some of the hip hop guys, like I'll just do a verse on your song, and that'll be that. But it evolved and evolved and evolved, and in the end, I ended up kind of rewriting this song and producing it and engineering it, actually right here in this room, and making a whole thing out of it. And they loved it, and I really am happy that the folks loved it too.
That's awesome. Do you think that's something you'd be interested in doing more of in the future?
Possibly, yeah, if the right thing came along. I mean, I do a lot of producing anyway, outside of what people know me for, and even outside of my own bands. But this was the first collaboration of this kind where, I'm taking an existing track that had been released on an album by a band, and then I'm completely reworking it into another song and doing all of that, producing and engineering in solitude, and then sending it to them and hoping they like it. That was unique. Yeah, I'm open to whatever. I mean, that's part of my last few years has been all about, say yes to more things, and say yes to things that even might make you a little might make you think twice. Just go ahead and say yes to it and then get into it. This was an example of that, and it worked out really, really well.
And what's the story about you and Alice in Chains? How did you come to join the band?
That's a long story. I mean, the sort of Cliff Notes version is I had a band called Comes with the Fall that formed in Atlanta in 1999 and recorded our first album here. I produced that album, and then we took that album as a finished product. I mean, I pressed it up and everything on my label, and then we moved to Los Angeles for a number of reasons. We just needed a change of scenery and moved across the country to Los Angeles. So one of the first people that we met upon our arrival was Cantrell, because he had been a mutual friend turned him on to our first album.
Okay.
And so he, wanted to meet me right away. And then we were introduced in this club called the Dragonfly in Hollywood. And from then on, he was hanging out with us all the time, all the time. And he was jumping on stage with us every gig we had in Hollywood. people thought he was joining our band. It was a trip. And I taught him a couple of our songs off our first record in our kitchen. And then he would play with us. One time he even played bass for us when our bass player got locked up in Atlanta. Couldn't make a show we had at the Cat Club in LA. And I was like, oh, I'll play bass. So that's kind of what led to everything that has happened since. So we're talking early 2000, and then fast forward a few years, and 2006, we reconstitute Alice in Chains, and that starts that whole thing. And here we are, almost 18 years later.
Wow.
Yeah,
I'm still of the mindset that like the year 2000 wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, I know, it's funny, right? It's really funny.
So the way that I met you was almost a year ago at a gathering in Atlanta with people kind of connected to the XRP world. And you've since been dubbed by DAI as the official rock star of the Digital Asset Investor channel. So what's your story with XRP and blockchain? How did you get interested in that side of the world?
It's really just paying attention to what's happening and trying to formulate my response to it. And and in terms of XRP specifically, it really just comes down to utility and connections. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you still pretty bullish that XRP will play a role in the next financial system?
Yeah.
I think we share that viewpoint.
Yeah.
One of the things I really wanted to talk to you about today is about the music industry. And as I've learned more about this, I have a tremendous amount of respect for you and the fact that you actually own the rights to a lot of your music, which is not the case generally in that industry. So before we kind of talk about the implications of what that means, can you just explain like what are music rights, what could you own potentially, and why don't most artists own their own rights?
Well, yeah, the two biggest parts, I guess, to ownership is you have the composition, and then you have the sound recording itself. And some people, we hear terms like publishing, that's reference to song publishing. And that is the main stream of revenue for people who own rights to the composition. And it's also the main decision-making right that you can have about how a song is used. So if you just wrote a song, but you don't own or control the publishing, then even though you wrote it, you may or may not have any say at all about when and where and how that composition is used. If you do own the publishing rights, well, then you have virtually all the say. Now, on top of that, again, I said there's the sound recording. So, when you go in to make a record, a lot of times in the traditional music industry, the label has paid for that recording, and as such, a lot of times the label will own that recording virtually in perpetuity, meaning virtually forever. And there's all kinds of legal struggles going on right now for artists that made records in the early 70s or whatever and got really, really famous and now are looking at the limitations of how long a company can own outright a sound recording. But those things are still being fought out, and essentially the label's aim in most cases is to own the recording forever. Now that is changing a little bit. We have more, with the advent of the internet and all of these other changes that have happened as a result of the internet, whether we're talking about streaming or anything else, some of this business model is changing. But for the most part, the basic things to understand is there's the composition, there's the sound recording. If you own one, you have some power. If you own both, well, then you have all the power. And what happens sometimes is there's a middle ground where sometimes artists might, like increasingly now, if you look at the legal line on a record or on a, if you look down at the bottom of the page on the streaming services of your favorite artist records or songs, you'll see the legal line, like who owns it, like copyright such and such, year and who owns it.
Okay.
Increasingly, what we're seeing is the artist being owner, or some company the artist started being the owner, and then they'll license it to a major label. And in those cases, you might have the rights may revert to you after a certain number of years. So you own the recording, you own the songs, you license them to somebody so that they can hopefully promote it really heavily and all of that, and use their powers of persuasion to get you out there. But then after 7 years, 10 years, the rights revert back to you. But these are all things that are huge negotiating points. These are things that artists with little clout will have a much harder time negotiating in their favor. But these are important things to know about. And in my case, I came up in the early days of punk rock in this country, the early days, especially of hardcore punk in America. And back then, our kind of music was some of the most reviled music in the culture. I mean, every kind of authority figure hated it. I still have adults that are around my age coming up to me all these decades later saying that they got kicked out of school or kicked out of class or kicked out of their house because they had my band Neon Christ sticker on their jacket or on their school book or something. But in that time, we didn't have any illusions about widespread commercial success. We were just doing what we felt was important. The fact that kind of music and that scene, that underground scene that I was a part of certainly kickstarting in Atlanta, but was involved with in the early days for, in general, it went on to influence the whole world. What it taught me, though, is the importance of being a self-starter, because nobody else was going to record us. No one else was going to put out our records. So we had to do it. And we were 14, 15, 16-year-old kids, but we did it. No one was going to offer to become our agent. So the drummer in our band, Jimmy Deemer, was 14 years old. Jimmy Deemer was calling clubs and booking gigs for us up the East Coast. We couldn't even legally drive a car yet. And we went on an East Coast tour. So those things formed me as a musician and as a human being. So no matter what I've done since then, no matter what I've done since the early 80s, it's informed by that experience, and it's informed by watching other people that I admired live out a similar experience at an even higher level, like the guys in Black Flag running SST Records. I saw that firsthand. I got to know those guys. Or Ian MacKaye, Minor Threat, and Discord Records in Washington, D.C. These are artists and labels and records that literally changed the world. I just got back on this tour Alice just did. I was asked to be a celebrity tour guide at the Punk Rock Museum in Vegas. They've now built an entire museum to what we did. But I mean, that's only because of all the influence that's not possible to deny the entire, cultural landscape. So, but that taught me about owning your stuff. It taught me about the revenue streams that exist, whether you're operating independently or operating, on a major label. It taught me the fundamentals of what that means, how you get paid, how you can get ripped off. So, I learned early on self-sufficiency. And I also learned early on some of the pitfalls that can befall any of us. And through it all, I just kind of have maintained a catalog. So yeah, I own most of my stuff going back to when I was 16,
Wow. Now, what advice would you give to a new artist who's in the stage of like negotiating their first deal to make sure that they don't do something they regret?
Just understand what it is you really want. If it's more about becoming really, really popular and you really truly feel you need the megaphone that some bigger company can provide you, well, then just understand, if your priority is that, then there may be some things you have to give up if you truly want that company to work you in the way that you desire to be worked. If it's less about that for you, if it's more about autonomy, artistic control, doing what you want the way you feel you want it, then understand what I said earlier about what the basic parts to that are, like who has the publishing rights to your compositions, who's going to own the sound recordings compositions, and for how long. Those are things you really need to truly understand. You need to understand things like mechanical rights, sync licensing rights. Those are all things that you've got to understand whenever whenever your song is played on the radio. That's a performing right. Whenever your song is used in a commercial, that's going to be a synchronization right, or a sync right, a sync license. If you want more of a say about, well, I wouldn't want my song in that kind of commercial, or I wouldn't want my song in that kind of movie, well, then you need to own certainly the publishing rights, and if you can, also the sound recording. And by the way, those are the two revenue streams in a sync license that matter. The only two that matter in terms of decision-making power, and the only two that matter in terms of how revenue flows: publishing and sound recording, the master rights. That's it. So learn about those things. Learn about how money really flows in this industry, and learn that touring is going to be pretty much a loss leader until you get to a certain point, and then it might be one of the very few ways you can actually make some money once you get beyond a certain point. But you got to get there first. And until then, it's tough.
So one of the exciting things about blockchain technology is that it can disrupt some industries that are very heavily controlled and heavily centralized, like the music publishing industry. So let's talk a little bit about what your vision is. What do you see music looking like 10 years from now, once blockchain has become kind of widespread?
Well, I can envision a scenario where, much like we hear certain cutting edge thinkers talking now about tokenizing things like real estate, or tokenizing even public buildings, or land, or commodities, or units of energy. Well, you can do the same thing with music. And so perhaps a group that has a really large following and owns most or all of the rights to their entire catalog. I'm thinking of maybe like a Metallica. They own everything back to the beginning of their existence. And an artist like that could potentially create an infrastructure where the fans could own or like own a little piece of the catalog, invest in that catalog and own a little piece of it, the way one might own a little tokenized piece of your favorite museum, or sports arena, sports stadium, or sports team. These are all things that are possibilities for the future. And if an artist who owns all of their rights has a huge fan base, a very loyal fan base, a diehard fan base, could create a situation where any who are interested among that diehard fan base might be able to invest a little bit in the music they love, right? That creates some interesting economic possibilities, both for the artist and for that fan, that I could see potentially in the future some people, you know, maybe exercising that option. You know, David Bowie did a similar thing to this even prior to blockchain. He did a version of it on the stock market. You know, Bowie always owned his rights to his music. Interestingly, he was signed by a company called Main Man. And when Main Man first took him on in 1970, 71, and negotiated the deal with RCA that made Bowie famous, one of the things was that Main Man / Bowie would own the rights to the recordings and license them to RCA. Now that is still to this day, it's becoming more commonplace today, 50 years later, but even today, it's a relatively rare and privileged space from which to negotiate with a major company. In 1970, 71, it was almost unheard of. There were very, very, very few people who own the master rights to their compositions and to their recordings. Ray Charles is one.
All right, we had a little technical difficulty, but we're back.
So as I was saying, it's even a fairly rare and privileged kind of an arrangement to have now, where an artist owns the rights to their compositions and their sound recordings, and they're licensing them to a huge entity who is committed on a promotional level to making them a star. But in 1970, 71, when Tony DeFries was negotiating this deal on behalf of Bowie, it was virtually unheard of. But they got that deal. RCA hadn't had any kind of major rock star since Elvis Presley in the 50s, so they took this flyer on Bowie. It worked out really well. But the point to all of this is that when Bowie parted ways with his manager, Tony DeFries, around 75, 76, he managed himself from then on, his entire career. When he got to a certain point where he could afford to do it because of the massive success of his, you know, post-70s recordings, he bought Tony DeFries out of his share. So now Bowie owns his stuff outright, and he decides to leverage it on the stock exchange. And so fans bought into this stuff. Now, back then, that was a cutting edge deal for sure. He was always forward thinking. I think he would be all over this blockchain thing if he was still around. He would be all over this. Prince would be all over this too. Prince was another really forward thinking and like almost a crusader for artists' rights. And he was, you know, people remember in the 90s, the whole slave on the face thing. Well, that was, you know, whatever people think about that particular gesture, the spirit of it was, I had the best of what the traditional music industry had to offer. I literally reached the mountaintop of that, and it still wasn't enough for me as an artist, because there were still too many restrictions on when I could put stuff out, how I put it out. And he just didn't want that. And so, and then he realized that no matter how much money they offer you up front, I mean, he walked away from $100 million deal. And the point to him was, if you don't own your masters, your master owns you. And, you know, that, I have to say, I was listening and so were others. And yeah, so I think Prince would have been all over this blockchain thing. This would have been right up his alley, right up Bowie's alley. You know, we'll see who's the first to really jump on it and make something of it. But I think it's inevitable that somebody will. And whoever does get to that particular avenue first is going to really, I think, do themselves a lot of favors, you know.
Do you see music being distributed via NFTs directly from artists to fans?
Yeah, sure. That's a possibility as well. Yeah, absolutely. You know, yeah. There are going to be things that I don't even think we can imagine right now that are going to be the norm um, within the next 20 years. But um, that's the nature of things, I suppose. And what will be interesting too is how the laws catch up with all of this. Um, but yeah, this will all have to be dealt with. Yeah, all of it.
So there are any laws in place now that would affect an artist trying to distribute their music in a different way?
No, I don't think so. But I think I was more speaking to the fact that with the advent of the internet and everything that's come from that, like particularly the streaming services, there are still some things to be worked out about how and how much artists get paid through those platforms. And that's just an example of where I think um, the laws and the customs have not necessarily caught up with the technology. And right now, that's a major issue with payment flows in music. Now, artists who own all their stuff and are huge, then they might have less of a problem. I don't know. I don't know. Taylor Swift is crying the same tears as many others who are on the streaming platforms, but uh, if she's not, then she's an exception. And so I'm just saying that as we move forward into this blockchain technology uh, environment that we are moving into inevitably, that ship's sailed already or whatever. The train has left the station. Um, uh, I just can foresee more of these kinds of struggles playing out with uh, but it'll be interesting because contracts will be negotiated in a different way as well. The contract itself, the agreement itself, um, could be uh, memorialized on the blockchain. Any agreement that you make with any other company or any other collaborators, artistic collaborators, or any other company that you're helping with like maybe you're lending your likeness to advertising, or you're licensing your music. All of these things could be memorialized via smart contracts, and that's going to be a trip. That's really going to be interesting.
Yeah, it'll bring transparency to a world that didn't have much, which could
Right.
put the spotlight on some maybe manipulative negotiating techniques that now everyone can see and basically bring attention to.
Exactly. Or the kinds of backroom deals that were decided long ago prior to this this avenue of transparency. And that's one of the main things with the streaming services that I hear artists complaining about is they weren't even privy to whatever deals the labels cut with these platforms. Mm-hmm. And it's really difficult to even know how and how much you're getting paid per stream. And there's all sorts of different classifications of different streams and where they come from. There's so many ways that it makes it really tough to know exactly how much, even if you see it on a statement, how does this math work? It becomes really tough to see that, really tough to understand and justify it. So people put it down to these were deals that were made without us. And so that kind of thing might be harder to do in the new blockchain environment.
And one of the biggest music disruptions in our lifetime was iTunes, and that for the first time you could kind of buy a 99-cent song. But we learned pretty quickly that the credit card industry doesn't really like 99-cent payments because of how their structure's set up. And that's one of the cool things about blockchain payments is you could still profitably charge somebody 99 cents for something because the transaction fee would be lower. So do you see that kind of fitting into the next version of the world where we have almost like you pay maybe for the percentage of the song that you listen to? What's your vision on that side of the music industry?
I could see it streamlining all of that. I could see it streamlining the relationship, further streamlining the relationship between the fan and the artist, or the fan and the platform. I could also see it streamlining the relationship between artists who are collaborating on something. How, you know, like we were talking earlier about my collaboration with the Mongolian band, The Who, how those payment splits could be just more instantaneous, and they could be, again, more transparent. And yeah, I could really see this affecting everything. I mean, we're talking about money and we're talking about payment flows, right? So once you disrupt or remake that, and the mechanisms by which that whole system works, you're really getting at the heart of the matter there. And then you also, as we have stated, are transforming the way contracts are memorialized and executed. And so that, I mean, those two things together, that's going to be really interesting. That's going to be really interesting.
One interesting thing for us as blockchain sort of students is we learn about this tech, and I'm like, why aren't people using it yet? So what's your sort of theory or guess as to why this stuff is available but not quite rolled out to the mainstream?
I think it's just a matter of time. Really, that's what it is. It's a lot to kind of get your mind around, but you know, I view it much the same way as the adoption of platforms or on the internet that we now take for granted, or the use of functionality on the internet that we now take for granted. You know, the first time using email or any of that kind of stuff was really kind of like, whoa, this is weird, you know, but then it's not weird anymore. And then you can't imagine your life without it, or the functionality that we have in smartphones, you know. There's so many things. I mean, even now with the proliferation of apps, you know, like it can still be a learning curve for me to, I mean, like it's a decision I have to make sometimes. Like, do I want that app? Do I need that app? If you know, is this app attached to something I really do need? Or, you know, so I think it's just down to that. I think it's down to familiarity. There is a bit of a learning curve at some point through all sorts of different circumstances that the obstacles to negotiating that learning curve are going to be gradually knocked away, and then people will have ways to interact with this technology that don't require you to be you know, a coder or something, you know, like, and then it's going to be on. Then it's going to be on, you know. Yeah.
If you think about the world of real estate just alone, that there was so much paperwork and documents, and the idea that you would not have to go in person to sign those seemed like a crazy thing not too many years ago. And now we take the DocuSign type apps for granted. I can't imagine why you would bother printing these things out and mailing them when you have a better alternative.
Exactly. That's another example right there. And at first it's sort of strange, but then you get used to it, and then before long it's like, well, I'm just going to have my own DocuSign account, because I'm signing things all the time through it, or maybe I'm issuing things to other people that they need to sign or that we both need to sign. So yeah, I'll just have my own account. And it's that's how everything changes. So it's going to be no different with this. But once these changes happen, it's really going to transform a lot of things about our everyday lives. Again, some of which we can't even imagine right now. But it'll be really interesting to see exactly how these things take form. That will be exciting. That will be exciting.
I mean, a big part of my life when I was a teenager was going to music stores and flipping through the records or cassettes, or when CDs came out. So the physical side of music seems to be going away. Do you think that we'll still have records and CDs in a couple of years, or are we going all digital?
Well, ironically or interestingly, vinyl's making a huge comeback right now. It has been for the last few years, even as all of these other changes are taking place in the digital realm. So I think it's a sign that one, people still want a physical object to hold, vinyl records and CDs, but I would say particularly vinyl records lend themselves to becoming almost like heirlooms, and collectibles. And so I think what I hope is that we'll be entering a world of greater options, so that if you want the vinyl LP, you can get it. And if you want to just operate digitally, you can do that too. You can do both. You can, and if you're an artist, you can choose to create in all of these different, you can create and distribute in all of these different platforms if you choose to. I still love manufacturing vinyl records. I have 2 solo albums out now, both of which have been pressed up on vinyl records. Went the whole route with the different colors and the different, and they're all collectible and they're all signed, and it's really fun to do that. But of course, it's all available on the streaming services as well. It doesn't have to be an either or. It can be both. And the point is that this digital realm, even though it's been 20 some odd years that we've really been exposed to it, it's in its infancy. And now with the advent of blockchain, it's going to take off to a different stratosphere. And in terms of functionality, and because again, we're talking about music, but this is going to be the case with all forms of media. And so, and really all forms of entertainment and all forms of, like we're saying, negotiating. It's going to transform every aspect of our lives. And so just speaking about music, it'll just be about more options, more options, whether you're a creator, whether you're a fan, whatever, whether you're a company, you'll have more options to operate in. And again, I think that word transparency is very important too. That'll be another thing. And that'll be maybe one of the newer things that we'll all have to get used to. It's like, while you can fractionalize a payment and it can be instant and you can see exactly what's going on. You can see exactly what happened at all stages. And that's going to be really cool.
One aspect of blockchain and decentralized technology that I like is the decrease in needing to ask for permission to do things. And when you're an artist and you're beholden to a label, you got to ask permission, right? If you want to do a variety of things. So do you see this next era giving more freedom and independence to artists, as they don't need to ask for permission to issue a song on blockchain or whatever they want to do?
Well, again, it will depend on what kind of contract you negotiated and signed. But for those artists who are more self-starters and more inclined toward DIY, doing it yourself kind of things. It's going to be, I think it's going to be quite the renaissance. And likewise, I think for some of the companies that own massive catalogs of many artists across decades, they will also have a bit of a renaissance. I mean, I think as we speak, they're probably trying to figure out, some people at least, some more of the more forward thinking among them are already trying to figure out, like, how do we maximize this? Like, this is going to be something. But yeah, I mean, yeah, for the self-starters, it'll be great. If you're signed to a label, you'll still have to deal with permissions and things, depending again on what you signed and what you agreed to. But the execution of whatever it is you're trying to do could become much more streamlined, and a lot of things that weren't even possible or aren't possible now will become possible in the future, regardless of your status in terms of relationship with a label, or whether you're completely self-owned, self-made. Regardless, it's gonna change a lot of things for everybody.
So we're coming to the end of 2023. So 2024 will be here before we realize it. What can we expect to see from William DuVall in the next year? What are you going to be doing?
Well, I'm right now I'm writing a record. I don't know. I couldn't begin to speculate on when that's going to be done or when it's going to be recorded, but that's kind of my major thing on my own right now, is trying to I'm in that stage now of, like, I think there's something going on here and I need to chase it down. That's where I am right now. But beyond that, I know Alice has at least one show at the Sick New World Festival in Vegas next year. That's booked, that's announced, and it's already sold out, that whole festival. So we're doing that. We might stitch some more dates around that as well, because like I said, us mobilizing everything for a one-off or a couple shows is not really feasible, or economical. So we'll probably string together some dates around that. I wouldn't be surprised. And then just, living life, man, just trying to ride this wave, trying to stay on the board.
It is quite a unique time in history, which is exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. May we live in interesting times? Well, we certainly do. We do.
Not boring.
Not boring at all. Not boring at all. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, William. It was a pleasure to speak with you and hear about your insights into the music industry. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure.